the stage is yours.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Martin.
Give me 1 sec to get my mic.
Take your time. I got this this kind of fact interesting about you.
About me.
Just in 2016 that you're participating in tens of conferences.
I am actually,
Friends of Search, Conversion World, Conversion Jam, Digital Elite Camp, all things data, and now here. How do you do that, and how do you do marketing for the next web?
I mostly travel my ass off, it feels like, lately. So it is actually my first time in Lithuania, but I get to see a lot of new countries this year, yeah.
Cool. What do you think about Lithuania?
I've barely seen it. I had the chance 2 hours to stay in the city 2 hours yesterday to see something, and it was pretty good, yeah.
But you're staying for a few days?
I'm staying here until tomorrow morning.
Oh,
need to fly
we
back
need to
again,
go out
yeah.
tonight then.
We better.
All right.
Cool, thanks. Wow, it's always a great warm-up to be warmed up by a mayor. That's awesome. I've never had that. So I'm going to talk today about what 500K articles learned us about the tech news today. And I think the previous 2 talks learned already a lot about the startup culture in the Baltics. So, like mentioned, I'm the marketing director for Indexical. We're a business unit of the Next Web. The Next Web is like a media company based out of Amsterdam. A little bit of an introduction into what the Next Web is. We're a media company officially. So we run the nextweb.com, one of the biggest tech publications across the world. And next to that, we organize our own great startup conference in Amsterdam later this year in May. We're going to open a huge co-working space in Amsterdam, which is called TQ. And one of the things I'm going to talk about today is really our data pillar. So we have 4 pillars for the Next Web, and one of our biggest these days is data. I'm a huge data geek myself, and what we really wanted to focus on for the Next Web is to do more with all the data that we had. So on a monthly basis, we reach over 7.5 million users. 20,000 people visit our events this year. And we're going to open this office with 6,000 square meters. But besides that, we also listed like 140,000 startups across the world to really give an impression of like, what's the startup culture? And what kind of companies do well, what kind of companies get investments. And I think that's great because the previous 2 speakers already talked about a lot of the data around investments and the Baltics itself. But what I want to do is give a little bit more insight from like a startup perspective, from like communication. So as a media company, and as we see a lot of competitors do as media companies, we publish bunches of content every day. And one of the biggest things that we saw is it's all about the data in the end. So the Next Web existed for the last 11 years already, and one of the biggest 2 issues that we saw that we published over 75,000 articles by now. But the problem was a lot of the data in there is really unstructured. So if we wanted to find like articles around a certain company or in a certain region, we had to go to Google to find it, which is pretty shit if you were like the owner of the data already and know where to find your ways on how to structure the data itself. The other issue, and that's of course a fun one, that we receive over 50,000 pitches from startups from any company or what kind of company in the world. I receive over 5 to 10 pitches a day, which is like over 1,000 on a yearly basis, which is great, but it also really screws up my inbox sometimes. But overall, our editorial team gets so many pitches that we thought like, okay, we can't blog about 50,000 startups or 50,000 pitches that we can do something about because some of the pitches are really shitty. So we're a tech company, we publish around tech, and still I get pitched around cruise lines, that an American company has a new cruise destination. Well, I'm not sure who you're pitching, but we're a tech company. We're not really interested in cruise ships these days. So about 2 years ago, we decided, okay, we need to turn all this content into data, but not only do it for ourselves, so the content that we have on the Next Web, the 75,000 articles, but also do it with other data sets that are out there from other publishers in the world and create like some sort of a map in that. So based on that, we created Index.co, and I'm not going to give you a whole pitch here on what Index.co is, but it really provides insight in private tech companies. And with private tech companies, we got a little bit of a definition in that. So one of the previous speakers from the VC fund was really talking about biotech, medical tech, I think as well. as an internet or a startup tech company or a media company, we see that a little bit different. So we try to focus less on medical tech and biotech. But what we really try to do there is provide insights into these kind of companies. What kind of content is already out there? You provide a lot of information already on your social networks, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all this information can be really valuable if you structure it in a certain way. And that's what we try to do, to provide more intelligence and more data-proof resources for you guys to work with that. So what we really try to think of it is that it's data-driven startup intelligence, that we try to track tech. And it works actually a little bit like this. I'm not going to get into all the details because like we're not at a developer conference, luckily, because otherwise I would be screwed as well. So what we do is we try to review and look at tech media, social media, and other sources to gather the content on these 140,000 startups at the moment. Then we do a bunch of incredible techie stuff like natural language processing and use our machine learning algorithms to understand what the content is about. Because you can imagine it's pretty easy to get from reading a headline that a certain company has got a 500K investment. But if you process like hundreds of articles on a daily basis, that's very hard to scale. So you need to come up with technical solutions to fix these issues. So based on that, we organize the data, but still it needs a lot of supervised learning because a lot of languages are different. A lot of notations in money, for example, are different from euro to US dollars. So that's what we use curators for, and we have some people on our team as well. And in the end, that of course leads back to verified structured data, which is on Index. This is what it looks like these days. Please sign up if you haven't yet. So what we really try to focus on is track tech, and that also leads us back on how you can leverage the data for your business, because you can find company-specific data. The mayor was just talking about the ways they use and created their tech map. Why not use Index, which already has a lot of this data and has even additional data on where these companies are based, but also where they are covered and what the potential is for certain companies. So this is only for like business, but also as an investor. I think there are a lot of investors here today and tomorrow. They always are on the lookout for new startups and new companies to invest in at some point. What we're trying to solve their issues at the moment is like using the data that is out there to predict at some point what kind of companies might do well in certain industries. I know for a fact that the 3D printing industry in Amsterdam is pretty booming. We have one of the biggest companies in 3D printing in Amsterdam. And what you could learn from that as well is that you see certain cities do really well or certain countries do really well in certain industries. I love the fact that the previous two speakers talked about like what kind of industries do well. And actually our data proved as well that e-commerce and SaaS businesses in the Baltics do very well compared to other businesses across the region or across Europe even. And also to collaborate with their colleagues, because why do magic things with spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff when you can also do that and use the data in index.co. So based on all this data that we collected over the last couple, I think around 2 to 3 years by now, is that we could learn a lot from the 500K articles. And this is the point where it gets more interesting for you, hopefully, is because, of course, you always get to have press attention. You're here probably to either raise money, promote your own startup, or learn a lot these days, which is going to be a great event for. So what we did is really look at 500K articles from around 70 media outlets. We based it on a lot of companies that are publishing tech news worldwide. And we track the sharing velocity for an article. The velocity is like the number of shares per article and also on the time base. So like, okay, the article gets like 5 shares today and 5 shares tomorrow. And we track how that works out. And of course, the articles are matched against the technology companies because we get hundreds and hundreds of articles every day from these 70 media sources. And we want to make sure with machine learning that they are attributed to the right companies. And we use a lot of difficult words like machine learning, NLP to do this kind of stuff. This collected over 4.5 million data points. But we also learned a lot from this. So what's your guess? What's the hottest tech company of 2015 still worldwide? Any guesses? Close. It's a company that is not doing very well lately. It's their worst quarter in 10 years, I think. Exactly. Of course. So we are already intelligent by knowing this, but this is only one company out of many that we try to track. So we need more intelligence. So obviously, Apple is the most covered company in 2015 across all these media sources. But the funny thing is, the top 3 companies, Apple, Facebook, and Google, account for over 10% of all coverage in tech media these days. And what we found based on the sharing velocity is that there's still a lot of shares to be done through Twitter. And actually, Twitter is also not doing that well lately. But there's still an increased number of shares across the platform. The lucky thing is I don't not only work for Index, but also for the Next Web, which we get to see a lot of data on the performance of Twitter in terms of traffic. For us, it's doing less at least, but I think a lot of publishers still see an increase in traffic from them, which is a good thing. And a lot of popular newcomers of tech companies that got more coverage in 2015, Square Payment Solutions, Slack, in my opinion, the best chat tool out there, and obviously SpaceX with all their successful and some missed launches of their shuttles, or rockets. So what you see here is what I just mentioned as well. The top 3 companies together get over 10% of coverage on media outlets. Already Apple does over 4.5%. So we digged a little bit deeper into the data and found out that shares per platform on company-related articles. So what does this tell you? In a lot of cases, as you just mentioned, that Twitter is still the king of sharing, this really proves that. So a lot of information around these companies is still shared on Twitter, for example. But also for a lot of companies, and definitely the bigger ones, and Netflix is definitely the exception there, is that Facebook obviously is also one, and in most cases the second biggest network for sharing information on these kind of companies. We believe, but it's more of a hypothesis for us still because it's very hard to prove, that Netflix is really a consumer product, and consumers are obviously on Facebook. It's not going to be different here in the Baltics. And that they share more information about new series, House of Cards, and all the other ones out there. Another very difficult to read graph, but it's more about the distribution of the company-related articles and where they are shared. And as you can see here as well, Twitter has the majority again of the shares on your company. And in this case, it's only the top 10 companies that we showed here, but it says a lot about the companies that aren't in here, the other 140,000 that are left. Because we looked at that data source as well and saw that a lot of the data is still similar for these chunks of companies. But how is news distributed over time? Anyone want to take a guess what the best news days are? Monday to Sunday? Any guesses? Tuesday and Thursday are still the biggest news days. Monday is number 4. Wednesday is number 3. And actually we saw, which is pretty logical in some ways as well, that on average weekend articles perform better on social media. I'm going to show you a graph in a second that will show you why that probably is as well. So this is the social interaction on a daily basis. And we see that most of the content is published on Tuesdays, but also that the average interactions are still pretty high on that day, but that the number of articles that are shared, as you can see on the right side of the graph, are way lower. You would almost imagine that they might take 2 days off. It's just crazy, right? Who doesn't work on weekends these days? But also that the average number of interactions per article goes up. So to make it more interesting to us as well, because I work for a tech company and a tech publisher, and we're in this research as well, we took a closer look at 8 publications. They were based on the Technium Leaderboard. So we looked at Business Insider, Recode, VentureBeat, and obviously the Next Web as well, just to get a little bit more understanding on what that meant for our competitors and how we can compete better with them. Almost obviously, because they have a pretty huge staff and they published a lot of content out, is that we found that Business Insider publishes out the most content by far. That Tuesday and Thursday are still the biggest news days there as well, not only in terms of traffic or in terms of shares, sorry, but also in terms of how much content they push out on a daily basis. And articles published over the weekends also perform better. And Mashable, The Verge, and Wired, and I think Wired is still talking at the same time right now, is that they perform best on social media. So as you can see here, the average number of articles per media outlet is crazy for Business Insider. I don't know how they do it. They probably automate a shitload of content somehow, or they hire like tens and thousands of people just to crank out content every day. But it really shows how much content is pushed out there on a daily basis. I think the top 70 of media outlets that we try to track in this research published over hundreds and thousands of hundreds of articles on a daily basis. Obviously, you will notice that the next web here is pretty small, 24.3, which is actually a good thing because we looked a little bit deeper into the data because we needed to find out why we were performing so badly in this research. But if you compare it to our team size, which is really, really small, then we were one of the best performing, actually. So it all has to do with team size as well, but that's pretty hard to find out for certain media outlets. Interesting, right? On the right side, you will see again that this is the performance on social media per media outlet. Like I mentioned, you would almost imagine that they might take days off on the weekends. But what actually is the good thing about this, that the average shares per article per social network are really going up with 20 to 30% on a Saturday or a Sunday. And they're pretty close together actually, compared to the other weekdays, which are pretty average for them for itself as well. And what you see there as well is also that Twitter was still the best performing in terms of the number of shares. Obviously, we don't have traffic numbers because, yeah, all these publications wouldn't share our data with us, which they also shouldn't. So the average number of shares per article per source is really what we looked at as well, because at some point it's not about just the absolute number, but also about the quality and also about the diversification of shares per network there. And what we found is that Facebook and Twitter were still the best performing out there, but closely followed by LinkedIn in some cases for some publishers. And you will find out that the distribution of shares per media outlet showed the same thing. But what's interesting here, that LinkedIn for quite a while wasn't doing that well for most media outlets. They still receive a lot of traffic for most companies, but what they found, or what we found in our research, that it's increasing over time. So we're not sure what it's completely based on yet. It's also because probably LinkedIn is giving a little bit more attention in their newsfeed to certain companies and to more company-related news at the moment. Obviously, Facebook was in most cases the bigger one, but in terms of engagement, we just not only looked at the number of shares or the number of likes, but also comments. So we combine them together, and then obviously you will see that Facebook is by far the most distributed platform, and that there's also most engagement on this platform. So what are the conclusions based on the social media platforms? Obviously, Twitter is still the sharing platform of choice. Facebook is king across engagement for all media outlets out there. Also because it's very easy to follow what they do there. You just have to like the company or the media outlet and you will get all your news automatically almost. But it also provides a lot of engagement. It is something we don't see on most other networks. LinkedIn's engagement is, for example, very low. Twitter just leads back to a like on a post. And even the number of retweets was, I think, decreasing what we saw in our research over time. Like mentioned, LinkedIn is getting a popularity as a sharing platform for tech news. There I get some numbers for our traffic as well to the next web. I think month over month we're seeing for the last 6 months now that it's increasing with 20% year or month over month, which is a pretty big thing. So don't write it off yet. And it's the same for Google+. Well, it's still out there some ways or another. There's still a lot of discussion if it's coming back, if it's going to be killed or not, but it's still out there. And it still gets views for a lot of companies. I think we got millions and millions of followers up there for the next app, but it still performs terrible in terms of traffic or in terms of engagement up there. But don't write that off just yet as well. So what does this say about the reality of startups and what can you do with this? Well, obviously, what's the best time to introduce something like this? You would say it's probably a Tuesday or the Thursday, but actually in reality it's not for you guys as a startup. because only the top 50 most covered companies can get their news in on a Tuesday or a Thursday, because that's why the velocity of articles is already that high on these kind of weekdays. So good luck trying to launch something on a Tuesday or a Thursday, because probably Apple, Google, Facebook, and the rest of the top 50, or the newcomers like Slack and Kickstarter will already beat you to it. And for us or myself as a tech publication, it makes more sense to cover them on certain days. So what's the alternative? Why not a Saturday? You already noticed that the average number of shares goes up onto in the weekends. We still have people working over the weekends to make sure that the right tech news is going to be covered. And we got people working, well, not 24/7 anymore, but at least 23/7, to just make sure that all news will be covered. It's not like media outlets are closed on the weekends. We just publish less content, as you noticed. But we're still looking for a lot of good content on the weekends as well. So take that into your advantage and pitch us just over the weekend. Because definitely for sure my inbox is way cleaner on the weekends. You got bad news to share. When do you share it? Exactly, Friday 5 p.m. or the Apple keynote. Because nobody is ever going to notice your news if you're going to do a layoff of 30% of your employees. We looked into the data just to make fun of some companies. I won't name them here because otherwise we might get our asses in trouble. But indeed, companies do a lot of crazy stuff actually during the Apple keynote if they have bad news to share. Same goes for Friday 5 p.m. Lucky thing is that we still have time zones in the world, so that a lot of content that is pushed in a certain time zone at 5 p.m. will still be picked up by other news outlets. But it's definitely not the best time to share your best news ever. If you want to track more data, please join index.co. It's free, it's hot, and it's student-proof, so it won't break anymore, hopefully, if you give it a try. It's been out there. I hope we still have some time for some questions. I see we still got a couple of minutes, and otherwise, please come talk data to me. I'm going to be here for at least the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Martin, and don't run away, because I have some good news for everyone. We still have a bit of time.
Nice.
So I guess you're happy to answer some questions, and I also have some questions. And I know that Eddie, okay, he's the first one because he's writing for the Next Web sometimes, right?
So the question is, why do you think people share most content on the weekends? It's actually not that they share most, but they share more on average per content that is pushed out. So we push out less content, so it will be more obvious that there is new content. That's usually what we notice. So what we see with a lot of tech publications, and that's what we do as well, that we try to focus more on getting more traffic on the weekends, because that's where our growth curve is. That's where we can get more easy growth. And because there are less articles published on weekends, on average you just get more shares. And people just share more because they're bored over the weekend sometimes. Actually, for years we've seen that a lot of content that is pushed out around Christmas gets way more shares as well, because people are stuck with their family over Christmas and just want to Google crazy stuff and crazy articles around tech news, because otherwise they get crazy bored with like the turkey next to them. Hopefully that answered your question.
And we have some questions in the audience, so let's take at least like 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if you can get a mic.
And how about the numbers of shares for feature stories and news stories? Do they differ? Because I guess most of publications now tend to schedule their feature stories, their longer reads for the weekends. Maybe that's part of the reason?
Yep. Probably as well. That's what I tried to talk a little bit about already. Like, we work on the weekends as well. We schedule a lot of our stories over the weekend. I don't have the numbers on this, but at least for the Next Web, I know that we publish way less news stories versus featured stories. So featured story versus news. SpaceX launching their new missile is obviously news content. The best ways to become a product manager is more like a featured story to us. And we try to focus on bringing that kind of content more on the weekends indeed. But we also try to publish that still on a weekday. So we take this into account. But we also, in a different perspective, try to focus more on news content as well over the weekend, because we know that there is growth for at least the Next Web as well. So that's why we also know, or at least I mentioned, that there's a lot of potential for startups and communication people on the weekends because they really never noticed that there's also the availability still for tech publications on the weekend. Hopefully, yeah. Cool.
Any other questions? Okay, then I have one.
Cool.
Perhaps like everyone is trying to get something published, like, and I'm talking also about the startups, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps you have like loads of requests and like the weirdest emails ever. But the hardest part is like to actually put some metrics and measure quality and non-quality content. How do you deal with that? Like, what is the quality content for you?
You mean for us as a publication?
Exactly.
Yes, we do. So we get indeed tons of pitches, and I receive many of them. We did a redesign, and for fun, they published my email address on the website. So since, I think, a month, I just get way more pitches, which is fun because they're also marketeers trying to pitch a marketeer, which is always an interesting case. So what we really try to look at is that for the next web as well, and that's not only based on the data that we have for Index, is that we try to find more structured data there as well. So if we know what kind of companies an article is about, or what kind of industry, or what kind of region, we can also, based on our own Google Analytics data, tell what works better for what kind of audiences. And then we see certain similarities with the index data as well, that the more popular companies do more well than the average startup in some country.
And you just mentioned that you are receiving like tons of pitches on
Yes.
your mailbox, right? So that's like pretty straightforward. Can you share some stories, like, or do you remember like any best pitches ever that like really surprised you?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I still wanted to do a whole talk about that, but the worst things are press releases. Please don't send us just a press release through your PR company or whatever. It probably will scale easily, and you will get still coverage, but probably on the most shitty outlets out there. So what works best, and it's really an open door, it's so obvious, just pitch us personally. It's not that hard to find my name. I do a lot of talks. You can easily find me on the internet. And you can find everybody on our team, and definitely on our editorial team, very easy through team pages. So it's not that hard to just find a name and pitch me personally, but also get in touch, write just a normal email. You will be very surprised that I think over 4 out of 5 emails is just a standard text, and you can usually see it because they copy-pasted your name in. In my case, they always write my name wrong, so that's even easier to spot. And the other thing is that you always see different font sizes and font types and colors in there, so you know for sure that they completely copy-pasted it. But just make it personal. Just send me a normal email. I know you want to go for scale, but how a lot of tech publications also work is if you get it published on one site, we of course monitor what our competitors bring for kind of news. We don't copy-paste everything. But as you've noticed, like the top 50 of covered companies in the world or in tech are relatively stable. So if we see news at some publication, the chances are very, very high that we're going to write about it as well. Definitely if it's like SpaceX and these huge kind of companies like Apple and Google, we're not going to miss like, we're not going to not blog about like the Apple keynote if like 50 other publications are doing it as well, because our audience depends on that we bring that data as well. So I think that also leads back to the pitch again, where it needs to become more personal. You have to have a very good story, of course, to convince us. And we have to believe in what your company brings you. But it's an open door again, but make it please personal. And just open with my name. It's not that hard, people, come on.
Everyone reminds that. Do we have any more questions in the audience? If not, I have one more, and I swear it's the last one,
Okay.
Martin, okay?
I don't mind.
So basically, like, you have like a lot of topics that you are covering on the Next Web.
Yeah.
And like there are many trending topics, like hot topics that you get many readers for. Can you actually identify some of like niche trending topics that are actually coming into the picture and becoming interesting for you?
Yes, yes, we can. I don't work for Obama. We see a couple of them. It's very hard to spot, though. We're doing a lot of research on this. I can't share everything around that because that's interesting data to us. What we see, that's more based, not really based on niches, but more based on content types. Because everybody is obviously talking about video is going to be big because Facebook is going to be more dependent on that and it's going to be more shared. So like video content is going to work better probably in the long run. That doesn't mean that you should start from tomorrow on, or probably Saturday, because now I've convinced you hopefully to work on Saturdays and publish your products on Sundays to do that. But that's going to be big. Definitely upcoming industries, 3D printing, cryptocurrencies, stuff like that. It's going to be only get bigger from here. So you will see automatically more coverage by a lot of news outlets. VR is one of the biggest in that area, I think, as well. Yeah, it depends how broad or how narrowed you want to see it. I think we track like a couple hundred different industries or categories of startups. And then still we don't track medical tech and biotech because we think it's a little bit out of the scope of the next web and our business.
Right. Thanks a lot for this, Martijn. So
Thanks for having me.
can we conclude?